Well, I would say athletics was the only other thing I was good at.
What do you do in athletics?
High jump.
On the morning of December 4th, just before 8 o'clock, Mike Tindall arrived at Gatcombe Park in Gloucestershire, expecting nothing more than a routine task. The air was cold, the ground stiff with frost, and the estate was quiet in the way only large royal properties can be at that hour. Mike, married to Zara Tindall, Princess Anne's daughter, was known within the royal family as practical, grounded, and reliable. He was not someone who chased drama or power. That was precisely why Princess Anne had trusted him with a small favor. There had been confusion about a storage building on the estate, something to do with paperwork and inventory records that didn't match. Mike had been asked to unlock the building, take a look inside, and report back. Nothing more. The building itself was an old stable block, converted years earlier into a storage space for documents and archived materials. According to the estate records, it held historical correspondence and unused files, nothing sensitive or valuable. Mike had been told the visit would take no more than 20 minutes, but the moment he stepped inside, he sensed something was off. Most of the boxes were exactly what he expected: old, dusty, carefully labeled, stacked neatly against the stone walls. Then he noticed a row of containers that did not fit. They were new, clean, and unmarked, placed in an area that, according to the official records, should have been empty. Curious and uneasy, Mike opened one. Inside were documents that made his stomach tighten. Financial records, property transfer papers, appraisal reports, and stamped clearly on several pages was the private office seal of Queen Camilla. At first, Mike assumed there must be a reasonable explanation. Royal paperwork was complex, and misunderstandings happened. But as he flipped through more pages, the concern grew into alarm. These were not routine documents. They referenced royal artifacts, ceremonial objects, and items that belonged to the crown estate, not to any individual. Even more troubling were draft agreements suggesting private sales of these items to overseas collectors. The contracts were unsigned, but they were detailed, organized, and clearly prepared with intent. Mike did not touch anything else. He took photographs of several pages with his phone and stepped back outside into the cold air, his hands shaking slightly. Within minutes, he called Princess Anne. When he explained what he had found, her response was immediate and sharp. She told him to leave the building at once and not to return. She said she would contact Prince William. Less than half an hour later, Anne, William, and a senior legal advisor were on an urgent call reviewing the images Mike had sent. The mood was tense and disbelieving. This was not a simple mistake. If the documents were real, they pointed to something far more serious: the unauthorized handling and possible sale of royal property. By 9:15 that morning, palace crisis procedures were activated. Security teams were sent to seal the storage building, and King Charles was pulled from his scheduled engagements for an emergency briefing. As the early hours of the crisis unfolded, it became clear that the discovery was not isolated. In fact, it appeared to confirm concerns that Princess Anne had quietly been tracking for months. Earlier in the year, she had noticed small irregularities in estate audit summaries. Nothing dramatic at first, just vague language about ceremonial items being moved between locations. Most people would have ignored it, but Anne was known for her attention to detail and strict respect for protocol. She requested additional documentation, and when it finally arrived weeks later, the concern deepened. Several valuable items had been removed from secure Crown Estate storage and listed as being held in temporary facilities. No clear locations were provided. The authorizations came from Camilla's office, justified as restoration work or reorganization. But when Anne checked these claims against official schedules, nothing lined up. The project cited did not exist. Still, Anne did not accuse anyone. She understood how dangerous even a hint of suspicion could be when it involved the Queen Consort. Instead, she began quietly asking questions. Trusted estate managers, archivists, and long-serving staff members were consulted discreetly. Over time, a pattern began to emerge. Over the previous year and a half, Camilla's office had expanded its involvement in areas traditionally overseen by committees and civil servants. A small circle of outside advisors had been brought in, people with backgrounds in art valuation and heritage consulting. They were not officially part of palace administration, yet they seemed to influence decisions before questions could be raised. Some staff members felt uneasy, but were hesitant to push back, given Camilla's position. Requests had come in for detailed inventories and appraisal histories of items that had not been reviewed in decades. When questioned, Camilla's private secretary described the effort as modernization, a way to manage the royal collection more efficiently and align it with modern values. But to those who understood how the Crown estate worked, the explanation did not fully make sense. Modernization did not require secrecy. It did not involve private storage sites or draft sales contracts. Prince William became aware of Anne's concerns during a private dinner in early autumn. After the meal, Anne placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of transfer records, unanswered emails, and a timeline of actions linked to Camilla's office. William read through it carefully, saying very little. He understood immediately how serious this could be. If royal property had been moved or prepared for sale without proper approval, the consequences would be severe, not just for Camilla, but for the monarchy itself. They agreed to proceed cautiously. William commissioned a quiet external audit of all property movements connected to Camilla's office over the past 2 years, using channels outside normal palace influence. Anne continued monitoring current activity, stepping in subtly when needed to prevent further transfers. Absolute secrecy was essential. A false accusation could tear the family apart and damage the crown beyond repair. But if their fears were correct, delay would only make things worse. What they did not expect was how quickly events would accelerate. The audit had barely begun when Mike Tindall opened that storage container on a frozen December morning. His discovery brought months of quiet concern crashing into a single urgent reality. By midday on December 4th, a secure room at Windsor Castle had been turned into a temporary investigation center. Present were Prince William, Princess Anne, senior legal advisors, and a forensic accountant experienced in tracking high-value assets. Mike Tindall was asked to remain available, his phone secured to prevent leaks. The documents were examined carefully. What emerged was deeply disturbing. The paperwork showed a clear process: items removed from official inventory, privately appraised, and prepared for potential sale through discreet international channels. None of it had been approved through the proper legal systems that governed royal property. Everything led back, directly or indirectly, to Camilla's private office. The forensic accountant explained it plainly. This was not accidental. There was a clear progression, starting with small test movements and escalating to more valuable items. Whoever organized it understood royal systems well enough to avoid immediate detection. The question that hung in the room was simple and painful. Was Camilla aware? Or had others acted in her name? The evidence made it difficult to believe she did not know. Authorizations carried her office seal, and several notes appeared to match her handwriting style, though formal analysis would be needed. As the morning turned into afternoon, the scope of the investigation widened. Financial records showed large payments to art consultants and valuation experts over the previous 18 months. The payments were technically legal, but closely matched the timeline of the property movements. When the pieces were placed together, a troubling picture formed. Whatever the motivation, fear, control, legacy, or security, the actions themselves could not be justified. By the end of the day, one truth was clear to everyone involved. What had begun as a routine visit by Mike Tindall had uncovered a crisis that would force the royal family to make the most painful decision of King Charles's reign, and nothing that followed would ever be the same again. As the investigation expanded throughout December 4th, the atmosphere inside the palace shifted from shock to grim determination. By early afternoon, a secure room at Windsor Castle had become the center of a fast-moving internal inquiry. Prince William sat at the head of the table, calm but visibly tense, while Princess Anne reviewed documents with the focus of someone who had spent her life enforcing rules others took for granted. Senior legal advisors and financial experts worked methodically, aware that every conclusion they reached could change the future of the monarchy. Mike Tindall, though not formally part of the investigation, remained nearby, answering questions when needed, still struggling to process how a simple favor had led to this. The documents he had discovered were now matched against audit records, estate logs, and financial accounts. The connections were impossible to ignore. Over an 18-month period, royal items had been moved out of Crown estate storage under justifications that did not hold up under scrutiny. Private appraisals had been ordered, draft contracts had been prepared, and although no sales had yet been completed, the groundwork was clearly in place. A forensic accountant explained that this was not how accidental misuse looked. Accidents were messy, inconsistent, and reactive. This operation was organized, patient, and deliberate. When asked about the possible end goal, she stated plainly that the documents pointed toward discreet private sales, likely through intermediaries, to avoid public attention. The question of Camilla's involvement became unavoidable. Princess Anne asked directly whether it was possible that staff had acted independently. The legal advisors answered carefully. While it was technically possible for staff to misuse authority, the scale and consistency of the actions made it extremely unlikely. Authorizations carried Camilla's office seal, and several handwritten notes appeared to match her known style. Even if she had not handled the logistics herself, the activity could not have occurred without her knowledge. Around this time, Zara Tindall's recollections added important context. She remembered casual conversations months earlier in which Camilla had asked detailed questions about storage protocols for items that were not frequently displayed. At the time, it seemed like curiosity. Now, it sounded more like preparation. Zara also recalled Camilla speaking about modernizing the royal collection, suggesting that certain pieces could be better used through long-term loans or strategic sales to fund charitable causes. While the idea itself was not unreasonable, the way it had been pursued clearly crossed established boundaries. By mid-afternoon, King Charles was fully briefed. The news hit him hard. Those present later described him as deeply shaken, struggling to reconcile the woman he loved with the evidence in front of him. Charles had spent decades defending Camilla, enduring public criticism and personal sacrifice to bring her to the position she now held. The idea that she might have endangered the institution he was sworn to protect left him visibly distressed. Still, the responsibility of the crown left little room for denial. He authorized a formal confrontation, knowing it would be one of the most painful moments of his life. The meeting was scheduled for later that day at Buckingham Palace, in a private room reserved for the most sensitive matters of state. Camilla was informed with minimal notice. No explanation was given, only that her presence was required immediately. When she arrived, the tension in the room was unmistakable. The seating arrangement alone made the situation clear. Charles sat at the head of the table. William and Anne were positioned together, supported by senior legal advisors. Camilla sat alone at the far end. The absence of ceremony was deliberate. This was not a family discussion. It was an institutional reckoning. Charles began quietly, his voice controlled but heavy with emotion. He told Camilla that serious concerns had been raised regarding unauthorized activities involving royal property connected to her office. He asked her to explain. For a long moment, Camilla said nothing. When she finally spoke, Her tone was defensive. She denied any wrongdoing and suggested that if errors had occurred, they were the result of staff actions, not her own. Princess Anne responded immediately, her voice firm and unyielding. Administrative mistakes, she said, did not explain private appraisals, undisclosed storage locations, and draft contracts for sale. Prince William then slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were copies of the documents from Gatcombe Park, financial records, correspondence with external advisors, and timelines showing the gradual escalation of activity. Camilla opened the folder slowly. As she read, her composure visibly weakened. She did not deny the documents were real. Instead, she reframed their purpose. She claimed she had been advised that reviewing and repositioning parts of the collection was necessary for modernization and long-term sustainability. She insisted that nothing had been sold and that any discussions were preliminary. The legal advisors responded clearly. The documents went beyond discussion. They showed preparation. Buyers had been identified. Sales channels had been explored. And none of this had been disclosed to the proper authorities. As the conversation continued, Camilla's frustration turned into anger. She spoke of years spent under scrutiny, of never being fully accepted, of feeling insecure even after becoming queen consort. She suggested that ensuring some level of personal security was understandable. That was the moment Princess Anne ended any remaining ambiguity. Royal property, she said, was not a personal safety net. It was held in trust for the public. Using it for personal protection, regardless of intent, was unacceptable. Charles listened in silence, his face drawn. When he finally spoke again, his voice broke. He told Camilla that while he did not doubt her dedication to him, he could not defend actions that placed the monarchy at risk. Prince William followed, speaking calmly but firmly. The monarchy survived, he said, only if it demonstrated that no one was above its rules. If this situation became public without decisive action, the damage would be irreversible. Camilla, now visibly shaken, asked what they intended to do. Charles closed his eyes briefly before answering. He said the institution had to be protected, even if the cost was personal devastation. The meeting continued for over an hour. Questions were asked, explanations were offered, but nothing changed the central conclusion. Camilla could not provide a credible defense. The evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear. By the time the meeting ended, the decision was effectively made. Palace officials began preparing legal documents and public statements. What would follow would not be loud or dramatic. There would be no public trial, no shouting headlines from the palace itself. Instead, the response would be procedural, comprehensive, and final. Camilla's operational role within the monarchy was over. The institution had chosen survival over sentiment, and the consequences of that choice were about to reshape the royal family forever. By early evening on December 4th, the decision reached inside Buckingham Palace was no longer just a private matter. The machinery of the monarchy had already shifted into motion, moving with quiet speed and careful precision. Legal advisors finalized documents, senior aides reviewed language line by line, and communications teams prepared a statement that would soon shock the world. At 6:57 p.m., Buckingham Palace released a brief but powerful announcement. It stated that Queen Camilla had been removed from all ceremonial, administrative, and residential privileges connected to the crown, effective immediately. While she would retain her title, she would no longer take part in official royal duties, have access to crown properties, or receive funding or security from royal household resources. The statement described the decision as final and non-negotiable. There was no apology, no explanation beyond references to irregularities involving crown estate property, and no promise of further details. The language was cold, precise, and unmistakably permanent. Within minutes, news organizations around the world interrupted regular programming. In Britain, BBC presenters read the statement slowly, clearly aware that they were witnessing something without modern precedent. Royal historians struggled to find comparisons. Even during past scandals and abdications, royal responses had been softer, more cautious, designed to preserve dignity. This was different. The palace had chosen clarity over comfort. In the United States, major networks described the decision as stunning and unprecedented, emphasizing how rare it was for a sitting queen consort to be so completely removed while the monarch remained on the throne. Public reaction was immediate and deeply divided. Older audiences, especially those who had never fully accepted Camilla after the Diana years, expressed a sense of grim validation. For them, the announcement felt like a reckoning long delayed. Social media filled with comments framing the decision as justice, with many revisiting old wounds and unresolved emotions tied to the past. At the same time, others reacted with sadness, seeing the event as a tragic fall for a woman who had spent years rebuilding her public image and working quietly on charitable causes. Younger audiences were more conflicted. Some argued that the decision showed the monarchy was capable of holding itself accountable, an essential step for survival in a modern society. Others questioned whether the punishment was too severe, suggesting that systemic weaknesses within royal administration may have played a role, and that Camilla alone was bearing the full weight of failure. Online debates grew intense. Hashtags trended within an hour, generating millions of posts across platforms. Some users praised Prince William and Princess Anne for acting decisively, while others accused them of consolidating power or acting without transparency. Conspiracy theories flourished, as they often do in moments of uncertainty, with claims ranging from internal power struggles to hidden political motives. Meanwhile, behind palace walls, the personal consequences were unfolding quietly. King Charles retreated to Highgrove, his private residence, canceling several public engagements. Staff described him as deeply shaken, moving through familiar rooms with a sense of loss that went beyond public duty. For decades, he had defended Camilla, believing in her loyalty and resilience. Now, he was forced to confront the reality that the woman he loved had, intentionally or not, endangered the institution he had sworn to protect. The emotional toll was visible. Those close to him said he appeared older, weighed down by regret and self-doubt, questioning his judgment and the choices that had shaped his reign. Camilla herself was escorted to a private home she owned independently, away from royal residences and public view. She was not arrested, and the palace carefully avoided language that suggested criminal charges. However, the terms of her removal were strict. She was barred from speaking publicly about royal matters, forbidden from using her title for commercial purposes, and stripped of the security protection that had surrounded her for years. The transition was abrupt and brutal. One day she was queen consort, attending state events and representing the crown. The next, she was effectively a private citizen, isolated from the world she had fought so hard to enter. For Prince William, the aftermath was approached with clarity rather than emotion. In private conversations, he reportedly emphasized that the decision, painful as it was, had been unavoidable. Allowing any individual to place personal interest above institutional duty, he believed, would ultimately destroy the monarchy. Princess Anne focused her energy on reform. She worked closely with palace officials to strengthen oversight systems, ensuring that no single office could authorize property movements or appraisals without multiple layers of approval. Independent audits were formalized, and transparency measures were expanded. For Anne, the crisis reinforced a belief she had always held: respect for tradition must never replace accountability. Zara and Mike Tindall, whose accidental discovery had triggered the entire chain of events, struggled privately with the weight of their role. Mike, in particular, replayed that morning at Gatcombe Park in his mind, wondering if things could have ended differently. Zara reassured him that uncovering the truth was not betrayal, but responsibility. As weeks passed, the monarchy settled into a new reality. Camilla's name was quietly removed from official materials. Portraits were relocated. Her former office was sealed and archived. Life at the palace continued, but the absence was felt. For the public, the story became a lesson debated across generations. Some saw a warning about power and entitlement. Others saw a tragedy shaped by fear, ambition, and the relentless pressure of life inside the monarchy. In the end, the fall of Queen Camilla was not just about one person's actions. It was about boundaries, trust, and the cost of crossing lines that exist to protect something larger than any individual. As winter deepened across Britain, one truth became clear. Titles can be granted, roles can be earned, but trust, once broken, is rarely restored. The monarchy survived the crisis by choosing principle over comfort, and in doing so, it reminded the world that even at the highest levels of power, consequences remain unavoidable. If this story has made you think, share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from, and what lessons do you take from this moment? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter in this royal story is always closer than it appears.